Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. Today, we're exploring a really thought-provoking collection of insights from Pierre Capel, a renowned expert. Our mission is basically to distill the most impactful knowledge that might just shift how you see things, from the workings of your body to global health discussions and even your own well-being. Dr. Capel, well, his background covers biochemistry, immunology, virology. He even set up genetic modification programs. So he brings this unique perspective. Let's begin.
Yeah, what's really compelling about his work is how he connects these, well, seemingly separate fields. He finds these underlying principles that seem to govern everything from our own biology right up to, society itself.
Okay, so to really get his viewpoint, maybe we should start with his framework. He wrote a book, and the title is quite intriguing. Where is the wind when it doesn't blow? What's he getting at there?
Right. He uses that title as a powerful metaphor. His idea is that in stillness, that windless state, there's actually immense power,
Mm.
energy,
hmm
information. He sees it as representing sort of the jump from the non-material, the spiritual realm, into our material world. Basically, he's emphasizing that matter and the non-material are deeply connected.
And his own path reflects that kind of thinking, doesn't it? It started in maths and physics.
Exactly. Then biochemistry, then medical immunology.
He did a lot in transplantation, pioneered immunotherapy for cancers, leukemias especially.
Yeah.
And then there's that collaboration with Wim Hof. That's pretty fascinating. He called them the fat and the thin.
Haha, yeah. Wim would inspire, do the amazing things, and then Capo would step in and explain the biochemistry behind it all. The breathing, meditation, the cold exposure. How does it actually work?
So how does someone consciously control their body temperature? That seems incredible.
Well, he talks about this one experiment. Wim Hof, in a wetsuit, in a scan, getting cold water flushed through. His temperature dropped, as you expect, but then it went back up. According to Capel, Wim consciously made his carbon atoms vibrate, generated heat right there in his chest where the blood flows. It was a measurable demonstration of that mind-body link. Really quite something.
Okay, so shifting gears slightly. His official title is Professor of Infectiology, particularly Experimental Immunology. So his views on viruses, vaccines, DNA, RNA, they carry weight, especially thinking about the recent pandemic. He raised concerns early on, didn't he?
He did. He talks about his ability to, as he puts it, read the four-letter code of viruses, the genetic sequence. And looking at SARS-CoV-2, he says he saw something unusual.
Unusual how?
He found, I think it was 29,682 letters in the code, and he identified sections that looked, in his words, cut and pasted, like a collage, not like something that evolved naturally in his assessment.
Yeah.
That led him to conclude it came from a lab. Now, that's a narrative that, while definitely debated, has gained more traction in some places.
He also asked some pointed questions about timing, right? Like vaccine contracts signed years before.
Yes, and how a PCR test for a virus nobody supposedly knew existed, it was ready in like a week. Those were questions he raised.
But his biggest concerns, the ones he details most, seem to be around the mRNA injections. He calls them lasting damage. Why?
Okay, so his technical argument goes like this. Natural mRNA, say for insulin, it's super unstable, lasts minutes. That instability is crucial for regulation, right? The body needs precise temporary signals.
Right, temporary.
But he states the mRNA in the injections was chemically tweaked using pseudoRNA to make it stable for weeks, maybe months. He calls this extended life, this prolonged instruction, a biological disaster in his view, because it bypasses natural control.
And how is this stuff made, the mRNA for the shots?
Right. Well, large-scale production needs a DNA template, usually made in bacteria like E. coli.
Yeah.
They use these circular DNA bits called plasmids. He calls them SMS messages bacteria use. And he asserts that this production process results in significant contamination, maybe 10 to 15% plasmid DNA fragments in a vaccine batches.
Okay, plasmid DNA contamination. But doesn't the body just break down DNA in the bloodstream?
Normally, yes.
Yeah.
Enzymes would chop it up almost immediately. That's his point.
So what's different here, according to him?
The lipid nanoparticles, the fat globules. He says they protect this plasmid DNA, so it bypasses those enzymes. It can actually get inside your cells.
Inside the cells.
And he claims this foreign DNA includes something called an SV40 promoter from simian virus 40. He describes it as a kind of always-on switch, a start motor.
An always-on switch. So putting this all together, what's the potential impact for you, for the listener, according to Capel?
Well, his major concern is this. If that plasmid DNA integrates into your own chromosomes, which he claims can happen and does happen, It could lead to continuous spike protein production, potentially, he says, for the rest of your life. And he also highlights this cleavage site on the spike protein and allows it to break off the cell and circulate. He argues this circulating spike can cause issues clotting, balance problems, chronic inflammation, myocarditis, dizziness, blood clots. And he points to findings of spike protein detected in blood years later, which he says mRNA alone couldn't explain because it should degrade quickly.
But he does say not everyone has the same outcome.
Correct. He puts that down to variations in the batches. Was the plasmid DNA intact or broken up? And also individual immune responses. Though, he adds, if the DNA is integrated into the chromosomes, the immune system can't really do much about the ongoing production.
Which leads to the obvious question, is there any way to reverse it, in his view?
He says the spike protein itself can be cleared eventually, but the constant reduction from integrated DNA, he believes that cannot be reversed. He actually said, quite movingly, that he truly wishes he was wrong about all this, that it was all nonsense.
That's quite a statement. Okay, let's shift to another controversial topic he discusses. Ivermectin, discovered back in '75, Nobel Prize in 2015. Started as antiparasitic.
Yeah, registered for animals 81, humans 87. For really terrible tropical diseases like river blindness, elephantiasis.
And the scale of its use is just massive, isn't it?
It really is. Merck apparently makes 1.2 million pills a day in Harlem. Gives them away free in 58 countries through the WHO, NGOs, CDC, FDA, all the big players. About 5 billion doses giving out. That's roughly a third of the world's population, most getting it twice.
Okay, distributed widely for parasites. But here's where Capel's claims get, well, really interesting. He says half its use is off-label.
That's his assertion. And he claims it's incredibly effective against viruses, including COVID-19. He states it clears it in 3 days, costs less than 1.20 a year. And even more strikingly, he calls it insanely good for tumors. Now, we have to stress, these specific uses are highly contested in mainstream medicine, but he presents his reasons.
Right. So what's the paradox he sees from 2020?
It's this. The same organizations distributing it free for off-label parasite control suddenly said, no, you can't use it for COVID-19. Why? It's off-label. It's for horses. Yet, he points out, places like Uttar Pradesh in India, parts of South America, Africa, Korea, they did use it for COVID. And he notes the pandemic seemed to diminish faster in those areas. He estimates over 100 million people worldwide got ivermectin off-label for COVID.
Which ties into that lawsuit you mentioned, Dr. Berber Pieksma. He's an expert witness for her.
Yes. She was facing a huge fine, 150,000 euro, possibly losing her license for prescribing ivermectin. And she used this analogy he shared. I'm walking by the canal, someone's drowning, I can swim, I can save them. But the sign says no swimming.
A powerful way to frame that ethical dilemma for doctors.
Absolutely. It raises big questions about responsibility versus regulation. Capsule hopes the ruling goes her way, not just to be right, but for what he sees as justice for people who might have lost loved ones.
Let's go back to the tumor claim. He called it insanely good. What's the evidence he points to?
Well, he references over 11,000 scientific studies on ivermectin generally. Some look at its mechanisms against various tumors. He says these studies show efficacy against leukemias, bladder, prostate, breast cancer, even late-stage metastatic cases.
How does it supposedly work?
Technically, it comes from a bacterium. It has multiple components in one molecule, things like indole, spirochetal, benzofuran structures. Each, he claims, has antiviral and anti-tumor effects. He calls it a kind of miracle cure. He also talks about using it with another antiparasitic, fenbendazole. Says they work synergistically, hitting different doorways or ion channels in cancer cells.
And you mentioned anecdotes like Mel Gibson on Joe Rogan talking about friends with stage 4 cancer.
Yes, those kinds of stories circulate. Regarding dosage for tumors, Capel says it's only slightly higher than for viruses. It's not about just taking more and more. It's more like rounds in boxing. You need rest periods between doses, an intermittent approach.
Okay, one final area he covers, which probably hits home for a lot of listeners, burnout. Chronic fatigue, concentration problems. This links back to his earlier work, right? The emotional DNA.
Exactly. The core idea is that our emotions, generated in the older, sort of unconscious limbic part of the brain, directly control our hormones. And those hormones then influence our DNA expression and our physical state.
He gave an example with animals.
Yeah, research on loneliness. Animals housed alone had non-malignant tumors grow 50 times larger and become metastatic, deadly, just from the psychological state of being isolated. Shows how deeply mind and body are linked, altering hundreds of functions.
So how does chronic stress fit into this picture, the kind many people experience today?
Well, he argues our society kind of glorifies being busy, right?
Hmm.
Which often leads straight to chronic stress, constantly elevated stress hormones. This pushes the immune system into a state of low-grade continuous inflammation. It's almost like the body thinks it's always in danger and needs to be ready for injury.
And he says burnout isn't just mental exhaustion. It actually starts with stress and worry, but ends up as a physically inflamed brain.
Precisely. Inflammatory messengers, like one called interleukin-6 or IL-6, they talk directly to the brain. Just like IL-6 makes you feel tired and rubbish when you have the flu, chronic low-level inflammation in the brain leads to that persistent fatigue.
Mm.
Also impaired decision-making, difficulty concentrating, the classic burnout symptoms.
That link is quite stark. What about recovery then? He talks about Pavlovian conditioning, negative associations triggering physical responses.
Yeah, it's fascinating. He gives this example. Say you associate your bicycle with a really stressful commute to a job you hated. Even years later, just seeing that bike or riding it for fun could trigger that old stress response.
Physically.
Physically, he claims you might see a tenfold increase in IL-6 an hour and a half later. You just feel exhausted, wiped out. And he argues that if you have just 2 or 3 of these negative associative triggers hit you in a day, it can completely floor you and make you unable to function.
Wow. So if that's the mechanism, what's his advice for actually overcoming burnout? It sounds like just taking a break isn't enough.
No, he's very clear. Radical life change is essential. Just trying to patch things up, tweak the edges, that won't cut it. You have to break those deeply embedded associations.
So what does that look like?
Drastic things. Yeah. Change your desk, paint the room, get rid of the bike. Or even his more extreme example, go shear sheep in Australia. Anything but going back into the same old system. It really comes down to a question he poses. Do you have the guts to make something of your life? To stop being dictated by society's script or perceived needs like a mortgage, even if it means a completely different way of living?
That is a lot to think about. What an incredible deep dive we've had today. We've covered everything from, well, the power and stillness to his very specific analysis of viruses and vaccines, the controversial story of ivermectin, and this deep link between our emotions and physical health, especially with burnout.
Yeah, looking back, I think the common thread in Capel's work is this real emphasis on understanding the systems, the hidden systems within us and around us, and importantly, challenging the conventional stories we're told, forging your own understanding.
Absolutely. Thank you for guiding us through that complex landscape. And for you, our listener, maybe here's a final thought to mull over, sparked by all this. What parts of your life right now are maybe being shaped by external narratives, by those conditioned responses we talked about? And what would it genuinely take for you to radically take charge, to maybe reshape your reality? Something to consider.